In 1837, a Victorian maid's leisure was 15 stolen minutes with a candle and a needle. By 1901, factory workers had Saturday afternoons, and a revolution in how humanity plays. This is the true story of how free time was born. Between 1837 and 1901, your average Victorian worker put in 16-hour days, 6 days a week. Not much time left for anything else. The wealthy had their entertainments, sure, but working people, they still found things to do. Football, cricket. Some of them even had these cocoa drinking societies where they just meet up and drink cocoa. That was the fun. Anyway, here's what Victorians did in those few hours they had. Victorian, England. Quick thing though. You comfortable? Check. Pillow, blanket, whatever. We're going to be here a while. So get settled now. The bell is ringing. Not your gentle morning alarm with its cheerful electronic tune. No, this is a proper Victorian handbell, and it's clanging right outside your bedroom door at precisely 5:30 in the morning. Your eyes snap open to a tiny attic room with sloped ceilings, so low you can't fully stand up. The thin mattress beneath you is lumpy with straw that pokes through worn cotton ticking. Your single blanket provides little warmth against the chill that seeps through the uninsulated walls. Hannah up, fires need lighting. Comes a sharp voice from a hallway. You're not you anymore. You're Hannah Cullwick, a maid of all work in a middle-class Victorian home in the 1860s, and your 17-hour workday is about to begin. Coming, ma'am, you call out, your voice from sleep. Quite different from your cozy bed right now, isn't it? No hitting snooze on this alarm. No scrolling through your phone for just 5 more minutes. In Hannah's world, those 5 minutes could cost you your job. And your job is the only thing standing between you and destitution. You pull on your plain work dress, the same one you wore yesterday and will wear tomorrow. Splash cold water on your face from a cracked ceramic basin and hurry downstairs in the dark. The house is freezing because none of the fires have been lit yet. That's your first task of approximately 50 you'll complete before you can collapse back onto that lumpy mattress tonight. By 6 a.m. you've lit fires in the kitchen, the dining room, and the master study. Your hands are already smudged with cold dust, and your back aches from carrying heavy scuttles up and down stairs, and your day has barely begun. Wait, you might be thinking, isn't this supposed to be about Victorian leisure time? This sounds like pure drudgery. Exactly, and that's our starting point. Because to understand what made leisure so precious to the Victorians, you need to understand how rare and valuable free time actually was. Hannah Cullwick was a real person, by the way. She kept detailed diaries of her life as a servant, which had become an invaluable window into working-class Victorian experience. In those diaries, she records starting work at 6 a.m. and not finishing until after 11 p.m. day after day after day. The few moments she got off were, as she wrote, rare, scattered, and often unplanned, like the odd Sunday afternoon when her employers were out visiting, or a brief walk along the pier with her friend Ellen, when she'd managed to finish her tasks early. So, when did Victorians actually have fun? You're probably wondering. That's the million-dollar question. For people like Hannah, leisure didn't come in nice, predictable chunks. It came in stolen moments. 15 minutes here, an hour there. And what you did with those precious slices of freedom really depended on who you were, where you lived, and what resources you had available. For most of the Victorian era, the working class, which was a vast majority of the population, simply didn't have what we would recognize as leisure time. They had survival time and work time. The end. And look, I've spent way too long researching Victorian servant schedules, like concerningly long. One thing that's clear, the whole concept of the weekend barely existed for most people at the start of Victoria's reign. In 1837, the idea of regular time off was a luxury most couldn't imagine. Sunday was technically a day of rest, but even then servants like Hannah would work reduced hours, not no hours. There were fires to light, meals to cook, dishes to wash. The wheels of the household had to keep turning. Picture this. Hannah kneeling on cold stone flags, scrubbing the front steps before dawn in winter, her knuckles raw and red from the combination of harsh lye soap and freezing temperatures. Not exactly what comes to mind when you think Victorian leisure, right? But here's where it gets interesting. As the Victorian period progressed, we're talking the 1860s and beyond, things started to change. Industrialization, for all its problems, began to create something revolutionary. A middle class with actual free time, office workers with shorter days, factory workers who eventually won the right to half-day Saturdays. So Hannah's grinding existence at the beginning of our story, it's actually the backdrop to one of the most significant social transformations in modern history, the birth of leisure as we understand it today. Let me walk you through a typical day in Hannah's life in the 1860s, just so you understand what we're working with. You're still Hannah, by the way. Sorry about that. But don't worry, you'll get your 15 minutes of freedom eventually. 5:30 a.m. wake up to that bell we mentioned. 6 a.m. light all the fires in the house, starting with the kitchen range. 6:30 a.m. begin breakfast preparations, setting the table, putting the kettle on, etc. 7:30 a.m. bring hot water to your employer's bedrooms for washing. 7:30 a.m. serve breakfast to the family. 8:30 a.m. clear breakfast, wash dishes. 9 a.m. begin daily cleaning, sweeping, dusting, making beds. 11 a.m. start preparing lunch. 12 p.m. serve lunch. 1 p.m. clear lunch, wash more dishes. 1:30 p.m. heavy cleaning tasks, beating rugs, scrubbing floors, polishing silver. 4 p.m. begin dinner preparations. 5:30 p.m. serve dinner. 6:30 p.m. clear dinner, wash more dishes. 7:30 p.m. evening tasks. Turn down beds. Prepare clothes for tomorrow. 9 p.m. serve evening tea. 10 p.m. final cleanup. 11 p.m. or later. Finally finish work and go to bed. I'm exhausted just writing the schedule. Imagine living it day after day with virtually no time off. But hang on, I hear you asking. Didn't Hannah ever get a day off? The thing is, the concept of regular days off for domestic servants wasn't really established. Instead, Hannah might get a few hours on a Sunday afternoon to attend church, or the occasional evening to visit family if she had any nearby. She certainly didn't get paid vacation time. In her diary, Hannah mentions one particular Sunday when she managed to slip away for a walk with her friend Ellen along a pier. They strolled for perhaps an hour, watching the boats and enjoying the sea air before Hannah had to hurry back to help with the evening meal. That single hour of freedom stands out enough in her daily routine that she specifically mentions in her diary. Let that sink in for a moment. A single hour of walking freely was noteworthy enough to record for posterity. Now, servants like Hannah were at the extreme end of the spectrum when it came to working hours. But even factory workers in the early Victorian period might work 14 to 16-hour days, 6 days a week with only Sundays off for religious observance. The sheer physical toll of such schedules is hard for us to comprehend today. Not just the hours worked, but the physical nature of most jobs. From hauling coal to operating dangerous machinery to standing for entire shifts in shops. Wait, you're saying Victorian factory workers only had Sundays off? How did they run errands or see the doctor or anything? Good question. The short answer is they barely managed. Most shops were open the same hours people worked. So running errands meant losing pay. Seeing a doctor that cost money, most workers didn't have to spare. The system wasn't designed with worker well-being in mind. But humans are remarkably adaptable. And in those tiny cracks of free time, an hour on Sunday afternoon, a rare half-day holiday, or a stolen evening, ordinary Victorians found ways of fun, to connect, to escape the drudgery of their daily lives. For Hannah, leisure might look like sitting by the kitchen fire with a cup of tea after the family had gone to bed, reading a newspaper left behind by her employer. It might be attending church on Sunday and staying to chat with friends afterward. Or it might be that precious walk along the pier with Ellen. Small moments, but meaningful ones. As the Victorian era progressed, An interesting thing happened. The middle class began to expand, and with it a new kind of worker emerged, the office clerk. These men, and they were almost exclusively men at first, generally worked shorter hours than manual laborers or servants. Their workday might end at 5 or 6 in the evening, and by the 1860s, many offices began closing at 2 p.m. on Saturdays. This may not sound revolutionary to us, but for Victorians, this half-day on Saturday was transformative. For the first time, a significant portion of the population had a reliable block of leisure time that wasn't Sunday. They could attend sporting events, go to museums, visit parks, or simply enjoy family time without breaking religious prohibitions against frivolous activities on the Sabbath. For Hannah, though, Saturday afternoon meant nothing special, just more work. But what about entertainment? Surely Victorians had some fun. They did. But the nature of that fun varied wildly depending on social class and where you lived. In Hannah's case, entertainment was simple and cost nothing. Conversation with fellow servants, perhaps singing songs around the kitchen table after the employers had gone to bed, reading as she had access to books or newspapers and enough candle to see by. The wealthier families Hannah worked for, meanwhile, enjoyed a completely different world of leisure. They attended balls and dinner parties, went to theater, took holidays at seaside resorts, and pursued hobbies like painting, music, or collecting. The Victorian era was perhaps the most class-stratified period in English history, and nowhere is this more evident than in how people spent their leisure time. The activities available to a wealthy industrialist bore virtually no resemblance to those available to the people who worked in his factories. Let's zoom in on Christmas Day for a moment. One of the few holidays Hannah might actually get some time off. Even then, her time off would be relative. She'd still need to help prepare the Christmas dinner and clean up afterward, but she might get a couple of hours in the afternoon to herself. In her diary, Hannah mentions meeting another servant on Christmas afternoon, a woman from a neighboring house who she rarely had time to see. They exchanged small gifts, handkerchiefs they had embroidered in those rare, quiet moments before sleep, and shared news about their families. For Hannah, this brief social connection was a highlight of her entire year. Meanwhile, her employers might be enjoying a lavish Christmas dinner with multiple courses, exchanging expensive gifts, playing parlor games, and singing carols around the piano. Activities that would have been completely inaccessible to Hannah, both financially and in terms of time. I should note that Hannah Cullwick's life took an unusual turn that was extremely rare for Victorian servants. She met and eventually secretly married a man named Arthur Munby, who was an upper-class barrister fascinated by working women's lives. Their relationship was complex and sometimes troubling by modern standards. But through it, Hannah gained opportunities that were unheard of for women of her class, including encouragement to keep the diary that gives us such insight into her life. So Hannah isn't entirely representative of all Victorian servants. Her experience was uniquely documented, but the grinding work schedule she describes was absolutely typical for ordinary working people like Hannah. One of the most significant changes in the Victorian period was a gradual reduction in working hours. This didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't happen without a fight. But over the course of Victoria's 64-year reign, working hours slowly decreased and worker protections slowly increased through a combination of labor activism, reformist politics, and changing attitudes about what constituted humane working conditions. By the end of the Victorian era in 1901, many workers had half-day Saturdays, and the 10-hour workday was becoming more standard than the 14-16-hour days common at the beginning of the period. These changes didn't happen because employers suddenly became more generous. They happened because workers organized, advocated for themselves, and gradually won concessions. The history of Victorian leisure is in many ways the history of the labor movement. For Hannah and people like her, these changes came too slowly to dramatically transform their lives. But for the generations that followed, these hard-won victories laid the groundwork for the concept of work-life balance that we're still wrestling with today. As you lie there in your comfortable bed, with your weekend ahead of you and your paid vacation time. If you're lucky enough to have it, spare a thought for Hannah, for the millions like her, who worked from dawn until well after dusk, whose leisure came in fragments, whose lives were defined by service to others. But also remember this, even in those constrained circumstances, people found joy, they found connection, they found ways to make meaning in the margins of their demanding lives. It's nearly midnight now in Hannah's world. The family has gone to bed, the dishes are washed, the kitchen is clean, and the fires are banked for the night. Hannah sits for a moment at the kitchen table, her feet throbbing, her back aching, but she has 15 minutes. 15 whole minutes before she needs to climb those stairs to her attic room. She pulls out a small piece of embroidery she's been working on whenever she can find a moment. It's a handkerchief with a simple flower pattern, a gift for her friend Ellen. By the light of a single candle stub, her rough reddened hands make surprisingly delicate stitches. For these few minutes, her time is her own. This is Victorian leisure at its most basic. Stolen moments of creativity and purpose in the narrow spaces between work and sleep. In our next part, we'll see how things began to change for some members of Victorian society. We'll meet the male office workers who in the 1860s found themselves with something previously unimaginable, regular free time, and how they filled it with a new passion, cricket. It's 1864, and something strange is happening in Britain. While Hannah is still scrubbing floors at dawn, a different sort of Victorian is experiencing something revolutionary. Actual free time. You're not Hannah anymore. Now you're Edward Finch, a 25-year-old clerk at a shipping office in London, and your life looks nothing like Hannah's. Your eyes open to morning light, filtering through cotton curtains. The small but private room you rent in a boarding house isn't luxurious, but it's yours alone. You've got a real mattress, not a straw stuffed sack. There's a proper washstand with a basin and pitcher. A small shelf holds half a dozen books, your prized possessions. The clock on your bedside table reads 6:30 a.m. No handbell needed to wake you. Your routine is set by the tick of office hours, not the demands of a household. You stretch and swing your legs over the side of the bed, feeling the cool floorboards under your feet. Your back doesn't ache from yesterday's labor. Your hands aren't raw from lye soap and scrubbing brushes. You're tired, sure, but it's a different kind of tired than Hannah's bone-deep exhaustion. Finch, breakfast in 15 minutes, calls your landlady from downstairs. Unlike Hannah, you don't have to cook your own meals. Your boarding house provides breakfast and dinner as part of your rent. It's nothing fancy. Porridge and toast in the morning. Usually meat and potatoes in the evening. But someone else makes it. Coming, Mrs. Porter, you call back. You're part of something new in Victorian society. The expanding ranks of office workers. Men, and it's almost exclusively men at this point, who work with paper and numbers rather than their hands. Lower middle class, but a world away from the physical grind of factory workers or servants. And the crucial difference, your workday has actual boundaries. You arrive at the shipping office by 8:30 a.m. You'll sit at your desk until 6 p.m. with a break for lunch. And then, this is the revolutionary part. You'll be done for the day. Actually done. No one will ring a bell at 9 p.m. demanding you serve tea or polish silver. But a real game changer is what happens on Saturday. At 2 p.m. on Saturday afternoon, your office closes. The great ledger books are shut, the inkwells are capped, and you walk out into the golden afternoon with something previous generations could barely imagine: scheduled leisure time. Half-day Saturdays were becoming increasingly common for office workers by the mid-1860s, and this predictable chunk of free time was about to transform British culture forever. "Finch, are you playing tomorrow?" asks Collins, another clerk, as you both pull on your coats at the office door that Saturday. "Wouldn't miss it," you reply with a grin. Weather's supposed to be fine. What you're talking about, what you're looking forward to with such anticipation, is cricket. Not watching professionals play, but actually playing yourself with a group of fellow clerks who formed a club. Cricket wasn't new, of course. The game had existed for centuries. But what was new was its explosion in popularity among men like you, lower middle-class workers with predictable free time and enough energy left to swing a bat. Think of it like this. If you're working a 14-hour day doing physical labor, the last thing you want to do in your precious free time is run around a field. But if you're sitting at a desk all day, that green cricket pitch looks like paradise. Saturday afternoon, you meet your teammates at a patch of open ground that your club has managed to secure for regular use. It's not a proper cricket ground, just a reasonably flat field on the edge of the city. But it's yours for the afternoon. About time. Finch, calls Williams as you approach. He's already chalking the creases onto the pitch. The stumps are being hammered in at either end. Someone's wife has brought a basket of sandwiches and a jug of lemonade. This scene was playing out all across Britain in the 1860s. Hundreds of cricket clubs were sprouting up as middle-class men discovered the joy of organized sport. Finding space to play was a constant challenge. Any reasonably flat open ground got pressed into service, with many patches doubling up for several different clubs on rotation. We got the field until 6, explains Harrison, your club captain. Then the West Side manufacturing lads take over. So let's not waste time. You take up your position in the field, feeling the afternoon sun on your face, the breeze ruffling your hair. For these few hours, ledgers and shipping manifests couldn't be further from your mind. Wait, hold up. I need to paint you a picture of what cricket actually looked like in the 1860s, because it was exactly the game you might see on TV today. The players weren't wearing pristine whites. Most clubs couldn't afford matching uniforms. You're in your shirt sleeves with your office trousers tucked into woolen socks. Some of the wealthier members have proper cricket flannels, but most make do with whatever's comfortable. The equipment is basic. The bat is heavier than modern ones, made of solid willow with a rather straight blade. The ball is leather hand-stitched, and it darkens quickly with use and inevitable grass stains. There are no gloves for the fielders, though the wicket-keeper might have rudimentary leather pads. The pitch itself is rough by today's standards, just a mown strip of ordinary grass with all its natural bumps and hollows. No carefully manicured turf here. When the ball hits one of those uneven spots and shoots off at an unexpected angle, everyone just laughs. It's part of the charm, and the sociability is as important as the competition. Between innings, you all share food and drink. You talk about work, politics, family. These aren't just teammates, they're becoming friends. Did you hear about the match at Lord's last week? Asked Williams during a break. W.G. Grace scored a century against Surrey. They say 2,000 people watched. And there it is, the first hint of a massive change coming cricket and all Victorian sports. The rise of the spectator. As you play your friendly match on that Saturday afternoon, professional cricket is evolving. The railways, which have transformed so much of Victorian life, are about to transform sport too. Before railways, watching someone else play cricket meant walking or taking a horse-drawn vehicle to a nearby match. Distance limited audience size. But now you can hop on a train in Birmingham in the morning and watch a match in London by afternoon. My cousin took the train to see Nottinghamshire play last month. Says Colin said the crowd was enormous. People coming from all over. This shift from cricket as something you do to cricket, as something you watch, will accelerate throughout the Victorian period. By the 1880s, county cricket will be drawing huge crowds. Star players like W.G. Grace will become national celebrities. Cricket will become less of a participation sport and more of a spectacle. But for now, in the mid-1860s, your club cricket match represents the sweet spot, a moment when ordinary men have both the time and energy to play rather than just watch. The game breaks up around 5:30, giving you time to clear the field before the next club arrives. You're pleasantly tired, your shirt sticking to your back with honest sweat, your hands slightly sore from catching and bowling. Same time next week, gentlemen, calls Harrison as you all gather your things. I'll be here, you reply. Though I hear the United Clerks are looking for a match soon. Perhaps we should challenge them. That's another thing about Victorian cricket. The endlessly proliferating matches and competitions. Every bank, every office, every factory with enough interested men seemed to form a team. Challenges flew back and forth. Rivalries developed. Cricket was becoming a way for groups to establish identity and pride. And why cricket specifically? Why not some other sport? Cricket had several advantages that made it perfect for the Victorian middle class. It was associated with rural English traditions at a time when many people felt unsettled by rapid urbanization. It required coordination and teamwork, but wasn't as physically rough as football. Most importantly, it embodied qualities the Victorians admired: fair play, strategy, patience, and skill. And there's a darker side to this, too. One that Victorians wouldn't have acknowledged, but we can see clearly now. Cricket, with its complex rules and etiquette, became a marker of proper Englishness. Participation signaled that you understood and respected a certain cultural code. For men like Edward trying to secure their place in the middle class, playing cricket the right way was a form of social signaling. But let's get back to Edward. It's evening now, and after washing up at his boarding house, he's meeting some teammates at a local pub. The Dog and Duck is busy with Saturday night patrons. Not the rough working class pubs where laborers go to escape crowded tenements, but a respectable establishment where clerks and shopkeepers can enjoy a pint without risking their reputations. There he is, calls Williams, raising a glass as you enter. A star bowler. You smile and make your way to their table, accepting the pint someone pushes toward you. The conversation flows easily. First about the match, then about work, then about the news of the day. Did you see they're extending the railway line to Chelmsford? Asks Harrison. Be able to get there in under an hour soon. My brother's firm is laying track in Yorkshire. Adds Collins. Says they can't hire men fast enough. The railways again, they keep coming up because they're changing everything about how Victorians live, work, and play. For someone like Hannah, railways mean little. Her world is confined to a house she serves in and perhaps a few streets around it. But for you, Edward, railways have already expanded your horizon dramatically, and they're about to make an even bigger impact on Victorian leisure. By the late 1860s, it's becoming common for cricket clubs to take day trips by train to play against teams in neighboring towns. By the 1870s, regular county cricket fixtures will depend entirely on railway schedules. By the 1880s, special cricket trains will run on match days, bringing thousands of spectators to major games. The same pattern will play out with football, racing, and virtually every other sport. Railways will create the modern sporting crowd, and with it, modern sporting culture. But tonight, in the warm pub with your friends, that future isn't quite visible yet. You're still in that golden moment when participation matters more than spectatorship, when playing is the point rather than watching professionals. Did you hear? Says Williams, lowering his voice slightly, that some of the northern factory teams are paying men to play. The table goes quiet. The idea of paying cricket players, of making them professionals rather than gentlemen amateurs, is scandalous to many Victorians, especially in the class-conscious South. Won't last, says Harrison firmly. Cricket's a gentleman's game. Always has been, always will be. He's wrong, of course. Professional cricket will not only last, but thrive. But his attitude reflects the tension at the heart of Victorian sport between the amateur ideal, playing for love of the game, and the reality of commercialization and professionalization. This same tension will play out even more dramatically in football in the coming decades. But that's a story for our next part. The evening winds down. You finish your pint, bid your friends good night, and walk back to your boarding house through gaslit streets. Your muscles ache pleasantly from the day's exertion. You feel satisfied, connected, part of something. And that's what Victorian leisure was increasingly about. Not just free time, but belonging. Cricket clubs, football teams, cycling groups, choral societies. These weren't just ways to pass time, but ways to forge identity in a rapidly changing world. By the 1860s, Britain was urbanizing and industrializing at a bewildering pace. Traditional social bonds were breaking down as people moved from villages to cities. New forms of leisure helped replace those bonds, giving people like Edward a sense of place and purpose beyond their work. You sleep well that night, already looking forward to next Saturday's match. Meanwhile, Hannah Cullwick is still working. Saturday half-holidays don't exist for household servants. Her employers have guests for dinner, so she's clearing plates and washing dishes well past 10 o'clock. When she finally drags herself up to her attic room, she's too exhausted to do anything but collapse into sleep. The stark contrast between Edward's leisure and Hannah's endless work highlights something important. The Victorian leisure revolution wasn't universal. It affected different classes at different times and in radically different ways. Office workers like Edward were the first to benefit, followed by skilled tradesmen and factory workers. By the end of the 1860s, the Saturday half-holiday was becoming more widespread. By the 1870s, it would be common enough to transform working-class leisure as well as middle-class pastimes. But some groups, particularly domestic servants like Hannah, would see much slower progress. Even by the end of the Victorian era, most household servants would still have less defined free time than other workers, their hours dictated by the needs and whims of their employers rather than by the clock. Yet even for the working classes, leisure time was gradually increasing, and with it came new opportunities for entertainment, socialization, and recreation that would have been unimaginable to previous generations. One last thing about Edward and his cricket club. The game they played that Saturday wasn't just fun. It was part of a larger Victorian ideology called muscular Christianity. This philosophy held that physical fitness and team sports built moral character as well as physical strength. Schools, churches, and reformers promoted sports as a way to develop Christian gentlemen who were both physically and morally robust. A healthy mind and a healthy body was the motto, borrowed from ancient Rome, but given new life in Victorian Britain. Team sports like cricket were seen as teaching cooperation, fair play, and good sportsmanship, all qualities valued by the Victorians. Of course, there was also a practical concern behind this promotion of organized sports, especially for the working classes. Sports were seen as a healthier alternative to drinking, gambling, and other vices that cause social problems. Which brings us to another crucial element of Victorian leisure, one that will become increasingly important as our story continues. For every new form of leisure that emerged in Victorian Britain, there were usually two competing visions. One focused on freedom and pleasure, and another focused on moral improvement and social control. The cricket that Edward enjoys sits comfortably in both camps. It's genuinely fun, but also respectable, the kind of leisure activity that earns approval rather than condemnation from authority figures. But as we'll see in our next part, not all Victorian leisure was so uncontroversial. When we look at the rise of football in the 1880s, we'll find a sport that became a battleground between working-class culture and middle-class respectability, a microcosm of the larger tensions in Victorian society. So, as you drift off to sleep, comfortable in your modern bed, imagine both Hannah in her attic room and Edward in his boarding house. Two Victorians with vastly different relationships to leisure, both caught up in the massive social transformations of their era. And maybe spare a thought for all those forgotten cricket clubs playing on rough fields with makeshift equipment, enjoying their revolutionary free time in the simplest of ways, a game with friends on a summer afternoon. The year is 1883. Edward and his cricket club are still playing their Saturday matches, but something bigger is happening in Victorian leisure, something that will utterly transform how ordinary people spend their precious free time. You're not Edward anymore. Now you're Jack Wilson, a 22-year-old iron worker in a factory in northern England, and your life is about to change. You wake before dawn, as you do 6 days a week. Your small room in a terrace house is cold, properly cold, not the mild chill that makes modern folks crank up the thermostat. You can see your breath in the air as you pull on your work clothes, still stiff with yesterday's sweat and grime. By 6 a.m., you're at the factory. The heat from the furnaces, A welcome relief from the morning cold. The noise is deafening. Hammers on metal. The roar of the furnaces. Men shouting to be heard over the din. The air is thick with coal dust and iron filings. For 10 hours, you'll work in this inferno. Muscles straining as you help maneuver heavy pieces of iron. The heat is so intense that your shirt is soaked through within the first hour. You'll drink gallons of water and still feel parched. Look alive. Wilson, your foreman shouts as a massive sheet of hot metal swings past, missing you by inches. This isn't work for the distracted or the slow. But here's the thing that makes 1883 different from 1863. At 2 p.m. on Saturday, a whistle blows. Work stops. The factory closes. And you, Jack Wilson, have the rest of Saturday free. This is new. This is revolutionary. This is a standardized 56-hour work week that's gradually been taking hold across British industry. 10 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and half a day on Saturday. What are you doing this afternoon then? Asks Thomas, your workmate, as you both wash coal dust from your faces and arms at the pump in the factory yard. Going to watch the match? You reply with a grin. They're playing Blackburn today. The match you're talking about isn't cricket. It's football. Association football, or soccer as Americans would call it. And in the industrial towns of northern England in the 1880s, it's becoming something like a religion. Wait, you're confused. Wasn't football around before the 1880s? Oh, it existed. Sure, football in various forms have been played for centuries, but what's happening in the 1880s is different. This is when football is being transformed from a chaotic folk game with few rules into the organized sport we'd recognize today. And crucially, this is when football becomes a game of the working class. So, how come football got so big with workers while cricket stayed more middle class? You might be wondering. Great question. And to answer it, we need to look at the specific conditions of working class life in the 1880s. Remember Edward, our office clerk? His work was sedentary. His body craved physical activity after a day at a desk. Cricket, with its relatively gentle pace and emphasis on skill over raw power, suited him perfectly. But for Jack, after 10 hours of physical labor in a factory, cricket felt too refined, too slow, too controlled. Football, on the other hand, offered something different. It was fast. It was physical. It allowed for the release of tension and aggression that built up during the work week. In a world where working men had little control over their lives, football offered 90 minutes of freedom, passion, and self-expression. Plus, it was cheap. You didn't need special equipment or a carefully maintained pitch. A ball and any reasonably flat piece of ground would do. So when Jack and thousands like him found themselves with free Saturday afternoons, they didn't follow the middle-class workers into cricket clubs. They created something of their own. Let's follow Jack to that football match he mentioned. After washing up, you change into your cleanest shirt. Not for church this time, but for the match. Football isn't just a game. It's an event, a place to see and be seen. A place where the grime and grind of the factory can be forgotten for a few hours. You walk with Thomas and a few other workmates toward the ground. It's not a stadium. Nothing so grand yet. Just a field with a rope marking the boundaries. Hastily erected stands on two sides, and goals that look like they might blow over in a strong wind. But what makes it special is the crowd. Nearly 2,000 people have gathered, almost all men, almost all from surrounding factories and workshops. The air buzzes with conversation, with anticipation, with the rare freedom of a Saturday afternoon. They say Johnson's playing today, says Thomas, as you find a spot to stand. Scored 3 against United last week. You nod, scanning the field for the local hero. Football is still amateur at this point, officially at least. No one's supposed to be paid to play. But everyone knows certain players get expenses or mysterious jobs with flexible hours that allow them to train and play. The teams emerge and a roar goes up from crowd. Your town against Blackburn. Local pride at stake. A whistle blows and the match begins. And it's, well, It's not exactly the football you'd see today. For one thing, the rules are still evolving. The Football Association was formed in 1863, but it took decades for standardized rules to be fully adopted. In 1883, things like the number of players on a team and the size of the pitch were more guidelines than strict regulations. Bloody hell, ref! Someone shouts as a Blackburn player executes what looks like a rugby tackle on your team's forward. The referee, a volunteer from a local club, blows his whistle and awards a free kick. The play is scrappy by modern standards. The heavy leather ball gets waterlogged quickly on the damp ground, making it painful to kick and head. The pitch itself is rutted and uneven, causing the ball to bounce unpredictably. But none of that matters to the crowd. They roar with every attack, groan with every missed chance, curse every perceived injustice in the referee. For these few hours, factory workers become sports commentators, tactical analysts, passionate fans. Get it forward. You find yourself shouting, caught up in collective emotion. Football in the 1880s was still primarily participatory, rather than just a spectator sport. Many of the men watching today will be playing in their own matches tomorrow. Informal kickabouts in parks or more organized games between factory teams. But this is the decade when that begins to change. When football starts its transformation into a mass spectator event, and the railways, those transformative Victorian inventions, play a crucial role. At halftime, you overhear two men talking about traveling to an away match the following week. Train gets in at 1. One explains, plenty of time before kickoff at 3. Before railways, following your team to an away match would have been impossible for a working man. The time and cost of travel by road would have been prohibitive. But now, a special football train can get you to a neighboring town for a few pennies. This is how football rivalries begin to extend beyond immediate neighbors. This is how supporters' cultures develop. This is how football becomes not just a local pastime, but a national obsession. The second half begins, and the match grows more intense. A goal for your team sends a crowd into raptures. Men who would barely make eye contact in the factory are now hugging each other, jumping up and down in shared joy. That's another key to understanding Victorian football. It provided an emotional outlet that was otherwise unavailable to working-class men. Victorian masculinity was rigid, emphasizing stoicism and emotional control. But for 90 minutes on a Saturday afternoon, those rules were suspended. Men could shout, cheer, weep, embrace, all without risking their masculine status. Look at him. Thomas laughs as a normally reserved foreman from another workshop leaps in the air, hat flying off at a near miss from your team. Wouldn't think he's the same man who fined Bill 2 shillings for dropping a tool last week. The match ends in a 2-1 victory for your team. The crowd disperses, buzzing with excitement, replaying key moments, debating what might have been. Many, including you and your friends, head straight to the pub to continue the conversation over pints of ale. The Red Lion is packed with match-goers. The noise almost as deafening as the factory floor, but infinitely more pleasant. Men crowd 3 deep at the bar, and every table is taken. The landlord and his staff rush to keep up with demand, pulling pint after pint. That save in the last minute, you say to Thomas, still riding the high of victory. Never seen anything like it. Johnson's goal wasn't bad either, he replies, raising his voice to be heard over the din. This combination, football followed by the pub, becomes a standard leisure pattern for working-class men in late Victorian Britain. The physical and emotional release of the match, followed by the sociable warmth of the pub, creates a perfect Saturday escape from the grind of industrial labor. And importantly, both football and the pub are democratizing spaces in a society otherwise rigidly stratified by class. On the terraces or at the bar, a factory worker's opinion on a goal or foul carries as much weight as anyone else's. These are rare environments where working men can speak freely, where their knowledge and judgment are valued. Wilson, what did you make of that offside call in the first half? Calls a man you recognize as a clerk from a factory office. someone who would normally barely acknowledge your existence. Rubbish call, you reply, and he nods vigorously in agreement. For a moment, the hierarchy of the factory is forgotten. You're just two football fans debating a referee's decision. This is a big part why football exploded in popularity in the 1880s. It offered working-class communities something they desperately needed, a sense of identity and belonging in a rapidly industrializing world that often treated them as interchangeable parts in a machine. You know they're talking about forming a proper league, says the clerk, warming to the conversation now that football has broken the ice. Regular fixtures home and away, points for wins and draws. He's referring to what will soon become the Football League, established in 1888. This is the point where football takes a huge leap forward in organization when it begins to become the commercial giant we know today. But in 1883, that's still just talk in pubs after matches. The game retains much of its community character. Teams represent towns and neighborhoods rather than billion-dollar global brands. As evening approaches, you and Thomas leave the pub and head toward home. The effects of physical labor and several pints are catching up with you, but there's a satisfaction that goes beyond simple pleasure. Saturday has provided what the work week can't. Agency, emotion, community. Same time next week, Thomas asks as you reach the corner where your paths diverge. Wouldn't miss it, you reply. And that's the thing about football in the 1880s. It quickly becomes not just something people enjoy, but something they can't imagine living without. It embeds itself in the weekly rhythm of working class life, providing structure and meaning beyond work. Now, I've been talking about men's leisure because, frankly, that's what dominated Victorian public life. But what about women? Did they get to enjoy the new leisure opportunities of the 1880s? The answer is complicated. Middle-class women had always had more leisure time than working-class women, but it was heavily constrained by notions of propriety. Taking tea with friends, reading approved literature, doing needlework, playing the piano. These were acceptable pastimes that could be enjoyed within the domestic sphere. Working-class women like Hannah Cullwick had even fewer options. Most worked long hours either as servant in factories or doing piecework at home, while also bearing primary responsibility for household chores and childcare. Their moments of leisure were snatched rather than scheduled. A brief chat with a neighbor while hanging laundry, singing songs while working, perhaps attending church functions on rare free evenings. By the 1880s, things were beginning to change, but slowly. The same Saturday half-holiday that allowed Jack to attend football matches did technically apply to women factory workers, too. But social expectations meant that women's free time was often filled with domestic labor, cleaning, mending, cooking for family rather than recreational activities. There were exceptions, of course. Some women did attend football matches, though they remained a small minority in the crowds. Others joined cycling clubs, though they faced ridicule and disapproval for wearing practical clothing such activity required. Women's cricket and hockey teams began to form primarily among the educated middle classes. But for most Victorian women, leisure remained more constrained than for their male counterparts. The public spaces where men gathered, football grounds and pubs, were considered improper for respectable women to frequent alone. That's another reason why the Temperance Movement, which we'll explore in our next part, was so significant for women's leisure. Cocoa rooms and temperance halls provided rare public spaces where women could socialize outside the home without risking their reputations. Back to Jack, though, as he reaches his lodgings, tired but content after his football-filled afternoon, he's participating in something much bigger than just a game. He's part of a fundamental shift in how ordinary people relate to leisure, from rare unstructured moments to regular organized activities that provide identity and community. Football in the 1880s was still developing its modern form. The rules were evolving. The penalty kick wouldn't be introduced until 1891. Teams and competitions were becoming more structured, but there was still a beautiful amateurism to much of it. And crucially, it was still as much about playing as watching. In parks and waste grounds across Britain every Sunday, thousands of informal matches took place alongside the more organized Saturday games. Almost every factory, every colliery, every workshop had its team. For many working men, football was not just entertainment, but active participation. This would change as the Victorian era progressed. By the 1890s, professionalization would be fully established with paid players and ever larger crowds. The gulf between the players and the spectators would widen. Football would become more of a business and less of a community activity. But in 1883, Jack and his friends still inhabit that sweet spot where the game is organized enough to be compelling, but not so commercialized that ordinary people feel disconnected from it. Where watching a match on Saturday and playing in one on Sunday still feels like participating in the same cultural phenomenon. As he drifts off to sleep that night, already looking forward to next Saturday's match, Jack has no idea he's living through a golden age of working-class leisure, one that will shape British culture for generations to come. And while football was becoming the dominant leisure activity in many working-class communities, it wasn't the only option. In our next part, we'll explore another crucial Victorian leisure institution, the pub. We'll see how these warm, sociable spaces provided escape and connection for workers like Jack, and how they triggered a powerful reaction in the form of the Temperance Movement, a reaction that would create alternative leisure venues like the Cocoa Rooms. It's Saturday night in 1885, and the Red Lion pub is alive with noise and warmth. After the football match, Jack and his workmates have settled in for the evening, their voices adding to the general hum of conversation that rises above the clink of glasses and occasional bursts of laughter. Let's stay with Jack for a while longer, because to understand Victorian leisure properly, we need to understand the pub. Not the gastropubs of today with their craft beers and artisanal burgers, but the Victorian public house, a place that was for many working-class men the center of social life outside work and home. Another asks Thomas, gesturing to Jack's empty pint glass. "Go on then," Jack replies, fishing in his pocket for pennies. Saturday is payday, and while most of his wages go to his lodgings and savings, he allows himself this weekly indulgence. The Red Lion isn't fancy. The floors are bare wood, scattered with sawdust that's changed weekly at best. The walls are stained yellow-brown from decades of tobacco smoke. The furniture is solid but worn, bearing the marks of countless elbows, spilled drinks, and occasional scuffles. But none of that matters to the men who pack the place every evening, and especially on Saturdays. What matters is the warmth, both physical and social. In a world before central heating, where many workers lived in damp, cold lodgings, the pub offered literal warmth from its coal fires. For single men like Jack, who rented just a room rather than a whole house, the pub provided space that their cramped lodgings couldn't. Room to stretch out, to talk, to simply exist beyond the confines of work and sleep. "Did you hear about Davies?" Thomas asks as he returns with fresh pints, the beer sloshing slightly as he sets them down. Got his hand caught in the press on Thursday. Lost 2 fingers. Jack winces. Industrial accidents are common, and there's no compensation beyond what friendly societies or union funds might provide. Speaking of which, Mason's collecting for him, Thomas adds, nodding to a man moving between tables with a cap held out for donations. Pass the hat when he comes round. This is another crucial function of the Victorian pub. It's where community support systems operate, where men who might struggle to discuss feelings directly can still express solidarity through practical actions. Collecting for injured workmates, organizing benefits for widows, sharing job information, all facilitated by the pub status as a communal living room for working men. Wilson. Thomas calls a voice from near the bar. It's Harris, an older man from your factory, waving you over to where a group has gathered. "We need 2 more for cards. You in?" And there's another aspect of pub leisure. Games. Card games, dominoes, darts, skittles. An early form of bowling. Pubs offered entertainment beyond just drinking. Some even had separate games rooms where more elaborate setups could be accommodated. You join the card game, placing a penny in the pot. It's not serious gambling, just enough to make the game interesting. Serious betting would happen elsewhere in dedicated gambling dens or at racetracks. This is social gaming punctuated by conversation, good-natured ribbing. So my wife says to me, Harris is saying as he deals the cards, either that dog goes or I do. So I says to her, I'll miss you, love, but the dog keeps the rats down. Laughter erupts around the table. Pub humor isn't subtle, but it provides release and connection. Let me tell you something important about Victorian pubs that might surprise you. They were absolutely everywhere. In towns and cities across Britain, there was roughly one pub for every 30 households. In some poor areas, the ratio was even higher. Why so many? Several reasons. First, clean water wasn't always reliable, making beer, which was boiled during brewing, often safer to drink. Second, pubs served as practical meeting places for people whose homes were too small or crowded for socializing. And third, running a pub was one of the few businesses that required relatively little capital to start, making it an accessible option for working-class entrepreneurs. The Red Lion is just one of perhaps a dozen pubs within walking distance of Jack's lodgings. Each has its own character, its own clientele, its own unwritten rules. Some are rougher, some more respectable. Some cater to particular trades or neighborhoods. Jack and his friends choose a Red Lion because it's their place, where they know the landlord, where they'll see familiar faces, where they feel comfortable. Your deal, Wilson, says Harris, passing the deck to you. As you shuffle, you glance around the busy room. In one corner, a group of older men argue politics, their voices rising occasionally above the general din near the window. Two young men who you recognize as clerks from a local office are trying to impress a barmaid with what seems to be limited success. At the bar, a grizzled old fellow who people say fought in the Crimean War nurses a single pint that will last him all evening. The pub is one of the few places in Victorian society where class lines blur slightly. While the wealthiest might frequent private clubs rather than public houses, it's not unusual to see clerks, skilled artisans, and factory workers all drinking under the same roof. The pub creates a temporary equality. Money for a pint and willingness to participate in the social exchange are the only real requirements for entry. Well, that and being male. The pub's status as a male domain is one of its defining features in the Victorian period. Women aren't entirely absent. Barmaids serve drinks. Some landladies run establishments with formidable authority. And in poorer areas, some working-class women do drink publicly. But by and large, respectable women don't frequent pubs, especially not alone. This gender division in leisure spaces is a crucial aspect of Victorian life. Men have the pub, the sporting ground, the club. Women have, well, that's more complicated, and we'll touch on it shortly. Your card game continues with small victories and losses marking the passage of time. Conversation flows as easily as the beer. Work complaints, football arguments, family news, neighborhood gossip. The pub is an information exchange as much as anything else. Have you heard they're building new houses over by the canal? Someone asks. Company housing for the glass works. My cousin's putting in for one. Replies another player. Says they've got actual bathrooms inside the house. This casual exchange of local knowledge, who's hiring, who's firing, where new housing is being built, which landlord is fair, which foreman is a tyrant, forms a crucial working-class intelligence network. In a world before mass media, this word-of-mouth information system helps people navigate the challenges of urban industrial life. The evening wears on. Some men leave for home. Others arrive fresh from work shifts. The noise level rises, then falls, then rises again. A spontaneous sing-along breaks out around the piano in the corner, music being another vital element of pub entertainment. My wife will have my hide. Cy Harris eventually, glancing at the clock on the wall. Promised I'd be home an hour ago. Family obligations begin to pull married men homeward. For single men like Jack, though, the pub can stretch to fill all available leisure time. With no one waiting up, he can stay until closing if his money holds out. That's actually a key point about Victorian pub culture. It absorbed a huge proportion of working-class leisure time and money. Estimates suggest that in some areas, workers spent up to a quarter of their wages on drink. Not all at once, but in the steady sociable consumption that filled evenings and weekends. This level of drinking had real consequences, of course. Alcohol-related illness, violence, and family poverty were genuine problems in Victorian communities. The morning after a heavy Saturday night, many men would be nursing hangovers rather than attending church. Many families struggled because too much of the weekly wage went to the pub rather than necessities. But here's where Victorian leisure gets really interesting, because these problems triggered one of the most significant social movements of the era, temperance. The Temperance Movement wasn't new to the Victorian period, but it gained extraordinary momentum as the century progressed. What began as a moderate push for moderation evolved into a full-fledged crusade against alcohol in all forms, with organizations like the UK Alliance calling for complete prohibition by the 1850s. Temperance advocates weren't just killjoys trying to stop working people from having fun, though that's how they were often perceived. Many were genuinely concerned about the social damage caused by excessive drinking. The domestic violence, the neglected children, the squandered wages, the broken health. And crucially for our story about leisure, temperance campaigners didn't just tell people to stop drinking. They created alternative leisure venues and activities. They understood that the pub met needs those needs wouldn't disappear just because the beer did. "Time, gentlemen. Please," calls the landlord of the Red Lion, signaling the approach of closing time. Jack drains his last pint and steps out into the cool night air, the warmth of the pub lingering like a pleasant glow as he walks back to his lodgings. Tomorrow is Sunday, traditionally a day of church and quiet contemplation, though many workers simply use it to recover from Saturday night. But in another part of town, plans are being laid for a very different kind of leisure venue, one that will challenge the pub's dominance of working-class social life and offer new options to those excluded from pub culture, particularly women and those who don't drink. Let's shift our focus to Monday evening and to Mary Parker, a 30-year-old seamstress. Unlike Jack with his Saturday football and pub ritual, Mary's leisure time is more constrained by both work demands and social expectations. Mary lives with her elderly mother in 2 small rooms above a draper shop. She works long hours doing piecework, detailed embroidery for wealthy customers, clothing that strains her eyes and cramps her fingers. Her rare leisure moments are usually spent at church functions or in brief visits with female friends who live nearby. The pub is not an option for Mary. A respectable single woman wouldn't risk her reputation by entering such a male domain alone, and even if she did, she wouldn't feel comfortable or welcome there. But tonight, Mary is trying something new. She's heard about a place recently opened near the market square, a cocoa room established by local temperance advocates as an alternative to the pub. "Are you sure about this?" asks her friend Sarah as they walk together through streets now quiet after the working day. "Sounds awfully dreary to me, drinking cocoa with a bunch of temperance folk." Mrs. Ellis from church says it's quite nice. Mary replies clean and warm with newspapers to read and decent food, and women are welcome. That last point is crucial. The Victorian temperance movement, though led largely by middle-class men, included many women who saw alcohol as a particular threat to family welfare. In creating alcohol-free social spaces, they inadvertently opened up new public leisure opportunities for women who had previously been limited to domestic or church-based activities. Mary and Sarah reached their destination, a well-lit storefront with Temperance Cocoa Room painted on a window in elegant script. Inside, the space is indeed clean and warm with polished wooden tables, comfortable chairs, and a counter where a matronly woman serves hot drinks and simple food. The Cocoa Room isn't packed like the Red Lion on Saturday night, but it's far from empty. Several small groups chat quietly over steaming cups. 2 older men play chess in the corner. A young woman reads a newspaper by the window. The atmosphere is calm, but not somber, more like a modern cafe than a dreary temperance hall. "Well, it's certainly clean," Sarah admits as they find a table, "and warmer than my lodgings." That practical benefit, warmth, light, comfort, was a major selling point for cocoa rooms and similar temperance venues. Just like pubs, they offered physical amenities that cramped working-class homes often couldn't provide. A server approaches their table. "What can I get you ladies?" "Our cocoa is freshly made." "Or we have coffee and various teas." There's soup as well and meat pies until they're gone. Mary orders cocoa for both of them and a bun to share. The prices are reasonable, comparable to or slightly cheaper than a pub by design. Temperance activists understood that to compete with drinking establishments, their alternatives needed to be affordable for working people. There's something called a reading circle starting at 7. The server mentions as she sets down their drinks. Ladies reading poetry and discussing books. You're welcome to join if you'd like. And there's another crucial aspect of temperance leisure venues. They offered not just food and drink, but activities, reading groups, musical performances, lectures, debates, even theatrical productions. They were community centers as much as refreshment houses. The cocoa itself is rich and sweet, served in proper cups with saucers, a small touch of refinement that distinguishes a place from the basic mugs of a working-class kitchen or the pint glasses of a pub. This is rather nice, Sarah admits, warming her hands on her cup. Though I miss the noise of my brother's house, it's almost too quiet. That contrast with the lively atmosphere of the pub was both a strength and weakness of temperance venues. They offered respite from the rowdiness that could make pubs uncomfortable for some, but lacked the spontaneous energy that drew others to drinking establishments. As Mary and Sarah sip their drinks, a group of men enter. Factory workers by the look of them, their clothes still bearing traces of the day's labor. They nod politely to the room and take a table near the back, ordering coffee and what looks like a substantial meal. "I didn't expect to see men like that here," Sarah whispers. "Thought it would be all church ladies and clerks." In fact, cocoa rooms and similar venues did attract a surprisingly diverse clientele. Some working men genuinely preferred them to pubs, whether for moral reasons to save money or simply to avoid temptation if they had drinking problems. Others used them alongside pubs, perhaps stopping at a cocoa room for a cheap meal before heading to the pub for evening socializing. By the 1880s, cocoa rooms were popping up all over Britain, from small operations run by local churches to large chains like Lockhart's, which operated dozens of establishments in major cities. They represented a significant alternative leisure infrastructure, one that specifically welcomed those excluded from pub culture. For women like Mary, these spaces offer a rare opportunity for public socializing without risk to reputation. For families, they provided venues where parents and children could spend time together outside the home. For working men trying to avoid alcohol, they offered the warmth and community of the pub without its temptations. "Look," Mary says, nodding to her notice board near the door. "They're organizing a day trip to the coast next month. 6 pence for the train fare." This was another important function of temperance organizations. They arranged outings and excursions that allowed working people to experience travel and recreation that might otherwise be inaccessible. Day trips to the seaside or countryside became a staple of temperance leisure, precursors to the package holidays of later eras. As Mary and Sarah finish their cocoa, the reading circle begins to gather at the large table in the center of the room. A mix of women, young and old, some obviously middle class in their dress and manner, others clearly working women like themselves. "Shall we join them?" Mary asks. "I've been meaning to read more poetry." Sarah hesitates, then shrugs. Why not? Better than darning socks all evening. And so they do, sliding into vacant chairs and receiving welcoming smiles from the other participants. The activity isn't revolutionary. Women reading poetry together is hardly radical, but the context is significant. This is neither a domestic parlor or a church hall, but a public space where women can engage with culture and ideas on their own terms. The reading begins. Selections from Tennyson and Tonight It Seems. Mary listens attentively, occasionally glancing around the room. The factory workers are still at their table, now playing dominoes over empty coffee cups. An elderly couple has arrived and sits holding hands by the fire. A young man writes intently in a notebook, pausing occasionally to sip his drink. This is Victorian leisure in its quieter form, less raucous than the football ground or pub, but no less significant in how it shapes people's lives and communities. The Cocoa Room represents an alternative vision of how working people might spend their precious free time in rational recreation that refreshes both body and mind. Of course, temperance venues never fully replace pubs. Not even close. Drinking establishments remain the dominant form of working-class leisure space throughout the Victorian period and beyond. But cocoa rooms and similar ventures succeeded in creating genuine alternatives that serve groups poorly accommodated by pub culture. As the reading circle concludes and Mary and Sarah prepare to leave, Mary feels a small satisfaction, not just in a pleasant evening, but from having expanded her world slightly, from having found a new space where she can exist publicly beyond work and home. For Victorian working women, such spaces were precious indeed. And in our next part, we'll see how another Victorian innovation, the railways, would open up even more leisure possibilities for people of all classes, transforming how Britons experience both work and play. Mary Parker is hooked. 3 weeks after her first visit to the Cocoa Room, she's become a regular. Tonight, she's introducing her younger sister, Elizabeth, to this new world of respectable public leisure. I still don't see why you're so excited about drinking cocoa, Elizabeth says skeptically as they walk. At 19, she's more interested in dances and young men than temperance causes. It's not just about the cocoa, Mary explains. It's about having somewhere to go, somewhere that isn't work or home or church. And that's the key to understanding the true significance of the temperance movement in Victorian leisure. It wasn't just about stopping people from drinking. It was about creating alternatives, new spaces, new activities, new possibilities for how free time could be spent. Let's step into the Cocoa Room with Mary and Elizabeth and take a closer look at what made these places special. The establishment they enter is one of the Lockhart Cocoa Rooms, part of a chain that spread rapidly across Britain in the 1870s and 1880s. Unlike the small church-run venue Mary visited initially, this is a larger, more commercial operation, though still driven by temperance principles. It's nicer than I expected, Elizabeth admits as they find seats. The room is well proportioned with high ceilings and large windows. Gas lamps cast a warm glow over polished wooden tables and comfortable chairs. Potted plants add touches of green. The walls are adorned with frame prints, landscapes, biblical scenes, and improving quotes in elaborate typography. "What can I get you ladies?" asks the server in a crisp apron. "2 cocos, please," Mary replies. "And do you have any of those currant buns today?" "Fresh this morning," the server assures her with a smile. While they wait for their order, Mary points out the features that make this place special. "They have newspapers and magazines over there," she explains, nodding to a rack on the wall. "And there's a meeting room upstairs where they hold lectures and musical evenings." "Lectures?" Elizabeth wrinkles her nose. "Sounds terribly dull." "Not at all," Mary insists. "Last week there was a fascinating talk about travels in Egypt with actual photographs shown through a magic lantern. And tomorrow there's a concert, a proper string quartet." This educational aspect was central to the temperance movement's approach to leisure. They believed in rational recreation, the idea that free time should be used for self-improvement as well as enjoyment. Cocoa rooms weren't just places to eat and drink, but venues for cultural and intellectual engagement. Their cocoa arrives rich, sweet, and served in elegant cups that wouldn't look out of place in a middle-class home. The currant buns come on a proper china plate with a small knife for the butter. These small touches of refinement were deliberate, elevating the experience above the basic fare of working-class home cooking. "Look around," Mary says quietly. "Notice anything?" Elizabeth scans the room, taking in the mix of patrons. There are obvious working men still in their work clothes, reading newspapers over simple meals. There are shop girls and seamstresses like Mary. There are a few middle-class women in respectable bonnets chatting over tea. There's even a family, mother, father, and 3 well-behaved children sharing what looks like a special treat. It's everyone. Elizabeth says surprised. Not just church people. Exactly. Mary nods. That's what makes it different from church functions. And there are no men getting rowdy like in a pub. The Cocoa Room represents something genuinely new in Victorian leisure. A public social space that's accessible to almost everyone regardless of class or gender. Unlike the pub, male-dominated, or the tea shop, too expensive for many workers, or the church hall, limited to believers, the Cocoa Room welcomes all who can afford a few pence for a drink. As they enjoy their cocoa, Mary points out a familiar face across the room. That's Mrs. Wilson from my church. She's one of the temperance ladies who helped start these places. The Temperance Movement, particularly in its later Victorian form, was heavily driven by women. While men held most official leadership positions, women were the movement's backbone, organizing, fundraising, and advocating. For many middle-class Victorian women, temperance activism provided a socially acceptable way to engage in public life at a time when more direct political involvement was still controversial. Should we go speak to her? Elizabeth asks. In a moment, Mary replies. First, I want to show you this. She leads Elizabeth to a notice board near the entrance covered with announcements and advertisements. Look at all the activities. Reading circles, singing groups, educational classes. There's a savings club where you can put aside a few pennies each week. And here they're organizing an excursion to Crystal Palace next month. The Cocoa Room functioned as a community hub, connecting people to opportunities beyond its walls. For working people with limited resources and networks, this access to organized activities and outings was valuable indeed. Can anyone join these things? Elizabeth asks, scanning the notices with growing interest. Most of them, yes, Mary confirms, though some are for members of the Temperance Society specifically. And there's the rub, because Cocoa Rooms weren't just about providing pleasant places to socialize. They had an explicit moral agenda to promote temperance. Many prominently displayed pledges of abstinence that patrons could sign, promising to forswear alcoholic drinks. Some included reading materials vividly illustrating the dangers of drink through stories and images. While this moral mission was sincere, driven by genuine concern about alcohol's harmful effects on individuals and communities, it could sometimes create an atmosphere of judgment that made some working-class people uncomfortable. Let's listen in on a conversation across the room where two factory workers sit over coffee and meat pies. Better than the Royal Oak, I'll give you that, one concedes, referring to a local pub. Cheaper, too, and you don't wake up with a sore head. Food's decent, his companion agrees. But I don't care for how that woman by the counter keeps looking at us like she's expecting us to start singing hymns or sign that pledge they keep pushing. Just ignore her, the first man advises. I come for the chess, and because my wife prefers me spending money here than at the Royal Oak. This exchange captures the complex relationship many working-class men had with temperance venues. They appreciated the practical benefits, affordable food, comfortable surroundings, games, and reading materials, but sometimes chafed at the moral expectations attached. For women like Mary, however, the temperance connection was often a positive. It gave Cocoa Rooms an aura of respectability that made them acceptable places for unaccompanied women to visit, a rarity in Victorian public leisure. Miss Parker calls a voice, interrupting Mary's thoughts. It's Mrs. Wilson, beckoning them to join her table. Mary leads Elizabeth over, making introductions. Mrs. Wilson is a vicar's wife, comfortably middle class in her dress and manner, but warm in her welcome. And how are you finding our little establishment? She asks Elizabeth. It's very nice, Elizabeth replies politely. I didn't realize there would be so many things to do. That's precisely the point, Mrs. Wilson says with satisfaction. To show that one can socialize without alcohol, to provide alternatives to the public house. She lowers her voice slightly. You know, before we opened this place, many women in this neighborhood hardly left their homes except for church or shopping. The pubs were for men, and there was nowhere else to go. Now, they have somewhere they can meet friends, read a newspaper, enjoy a proper cup of cocoa. This was the temperance movement at its best, recognizing and addressing genuine social needs, particularly for groups poorly served by existing leisure venues. We're expanding, too, Mrs. Wilson continues enthusiastically, opening a new room across town next month, and our Sunday lectures have become so popular, we've had to move them to the town hall. The Temperance Movement was indeed growing rapidly during this period. By the 1880s, there were thousands of cocoa rooms, coffee palaces, and temperance halls across Britain. In some towns, you might find a temperance establishment directly opposite a pub, offering explicit competition for workers' leisure time and money. Speaking of lectures, Mrs. Wilson adds, we have Dr. Richardson speaking next week on the physical effect of alcohol. A most distinguished physician. You should both come. Medical arguments were a powerful weapon in the temperance arsenal. As Victorian medicine became more scientific, temperance advocates eagerly cited research on alcohol's harmful effects. Lectures by medical authorities drew large crowds and lent the movement scientific credibility. We'll try to attend, Mary promises, though Elizabeth looks less enthusiastic about the prospect. As Mrs. Wilson excuses herself to greet other patrons, Elizabeth leans closer to Mary. She seems very earnest. She is, Mary acknowledges, but she's done a lot of good. Did you know she also runs a mother's meeting where women can bring their children? And she started a fund to help families when the main breadwinner is ill. This social welfare aspect was another important dimension of temperance work. Many activists understood that drinking problems were often connected to broader social issues, poverty, poor housing, lack of education, and worked to address these root causes alongside promoting abstinence. Their cocoa finished, Mary and Elizabeth decide to browse the books and magazines available for patrons' use. The selection reflects typical Victorian middle-class tastes, improving literature, religious texts, travel accounts, and respectable periodicals. Nothing too challenging or controversial, but a genuine resource for working people with limited access to reading materials. They have the latest Dickens. Elizabeth notes with interest, picking up a volume. You can borrow if you like, Mary tells her. They lend books to regular customers. This lending function made cocoa rooms early precursors to public libraries, which were still limited in many areas. By providing access to books and newspapers, temperance venues contributed significantly to working-class literacy and information access. As the sisters prepare to leave, they pass the counter where a prominently displayed pledge book sits open, ready for signatures. The pledge itself is printed at the top of each page in ornate lettering. I promise by divine assistance to abstain from all intoxicating liquors and to discourage their use by others. Mary has signed. Her neat signature appears on a page dated several weeks ago. Elizabeth glances at it, but doesn't reach for the pen. You don't have to, Mary assures her, seeing her hesitation. Plenty of people come here without signing. It's not that, Elizabeth says. I don't really drink anyway. It just seems so final, like making a promise in church. And that religious dimension was indeed central to much of the temperance movement, especially in its early phases. While later Victorian temperance advocacy incorporated more secular arguments about health and social welfare, the moral and spiritual case against alcohol remained powerful. Outside, the sisters pause on the pavement. The gas lamp a little on the street, and there's a chill in the evening air that makes Mary pull her shawl tighter. Well, she asks, what did you think? Elizabeth considers. It was better than I expected, she admits. Warmer than our rooms, certainly, and I wouldn't mind hearing that string quartet tomorrow. Mary smiles, pleased to have interested her sister in this new leisure option. They're opening more all the time. You know, there's talk of a grand coffee palace in the market square, 3 stories high with a reading room, a ladies' parlor, even a billiards table. This was no exaggeration. In major cities, temperance entrepreneurs were creating increasingly elaborate venues to compete with pubs and gin palaces. London's Lockhart's chain operated dozens of cocoa rooms. Liverpool had magnificent temperance hotels. Melbourne in Australia boasted coffee palaces that rivaled the grandest hotels in scale and decoration. As Mary and Elizabeth walk home, they pass a pub, the Red Lion, where we last saw Jack Wilson. Light, noise, and the smell of beer spill from its open door. A group of men stand outside laughing at some shared joke, while inside the piano can be heard accompanying a rowdy sing-along. Elizabeth glances at it, then back at Mary. The cocoa room is quieter. She observes. Is that good or bad? Mary asks, curious. Elizabeth shrugs. Different, I suppose. Good for some things, not for others. And therein lies the reality of Victorian temperance venues. They provided a genuine and valuable alternative to pub culture, but they couldn't fully replicate the spontaneity and energy that made pubs attractive. They served different needs, different moods, different aspects of human sociability. For Mary, the cocoa room offers something precious, a public space where she can exist freely as a respectable woman. For Elizabeth, it might offer access to books and music she wouldn't otherwise experience. For working men, it might provide affordable food and games without the temptation to spend too much on drink. The temperance movement never achieved its ultimate goal of a fully alcohol-free Britain. Pubs remained central to working-class leisure throughout the Victorian era and beyond. But what temperance activists did accomplish was the creation of a parallel leisure infrastructure that served previously neglected groups and expanded the options available to all. You might be wondering, did these cocoa rooms survive beyond the Victorian period? Some did, evolving into cafes or community centers as temperance fervor waned in the early 20th century. Others closed as commercial cafes and restaurants became more common and accessible to ordinary people. But their legacy lived on in several ways. They helped establish the idea that leisure venues could be respectable without being exclusive or expensive. They demonstrated the demand for alcohol-free social spaces. And perhaps most significantly, they proved that working-class women wanted and needed public leisure spaces as much as men did. Today, you might walk past buildings that once housed cocoa rooms without realizing their history. Sometimes the only clue is a faded sign in the brickwork or an architectural detail that seems too grand for an ordinary shop. These physical traces of the temperance movement remind us that Victorian leisure wasn't just about pubs and sports grounds, but encompassed a diverse range of spaces and activities that served different needs and preferences. As Mary and Elizabeth reach their lodgings, Mary makes one last pitch for tomorrow's concert. So you'll come with me? The quartet is playing Mozart? Elizabeth nods, surprisingly enthusiastic. Yes, I think I will. And perhaps we could look at that notice about Crystal Palace, too. I've always wanted to see it. And that's another way Victorian leisure was changing. Ordinary working people were beginning to develop aspirations for experiences beyond their immediate neighborhood. They wanted to see famous places to participate in culture, to expand their horizons. In our next part, we'll explore how the railways, Victorian Britain's revolutionary transportation technology, made such aspirations increasingly achievable, transforming leisure from a local activity into something that could cross distances and connect people to new places and experiences. It's a bright morning in July 1887, and something extraordinary is happening at the railway station. Hundreds of people crowd the platform dressed in their Sunday best, despite it being a Saturday. Excitement buzzes in the air. Children bounce on their toes, pointing at the massive steam engine that's just pulled in, belching smoke and hissing steam. This isn't a normal day. This is an excursion day. Let's join the crowd on the platform. You're no longer Mary or Jack. Now you're Thomas Wright, a 40-year-old carpenter with a wife and 3 children. After years of 6-day work weeks, you now have Saturday afternoons off. And today, your family is taking advantage of something previous generations could only dream of. A day trip to the seaside made possible by the railways. Stay close, Emily. Your wife Sarah calls to your youngest, who's straining to get a better view of the engine. We don't want to lose you in this crowd. The crowd is indeed impressive. Several hundred people, most clearly working class like yourselves, all booked on the same excursion train to Blackpool. The trip has been organized by your local temperance society.